Good morning, I'm Jim Leslie, the Kilted Guide. Welcome to 2022 Year of Storytelling. And what better story is there to tell than the story of one of the greatest storytellers of them all, Robert Burns, Scotland's national poet, famous throughout the world. And where better to tell that story than here in his birthplace of Alloway in Ayrshire in front of the Burns Monument erected in his memory. Burns was born here in Alloway on the 25th of January 1759, the son of a market gardener who had moved from Kincardineshire up near Aberdeen down to Alloway for work. His son, Robert, went on to become one of the world's most famous poets and Scotland's most famous export, voted in a national poll as Scotland's most famous and favourite Scot. His name is known everywhere. Every year on his birthday, Burns suppers commemorate his memory in every country around the world, in every continent, including Antarctica. Russians put him on their stamps. There is a crater in Mercury named for him. John Steinbeck used a line from his poem To a Mouse in the title of one of his most famous novels, Of Mice and Men. And Bob Dylan quoted Burns as his greatest inspiration. So, how does the son of a simple tenant farmer become such a national icon? Well, we're going to go around now to his birthplace and we shall continue the story. So here we are outside Burns' birthplace cottage in Alloway. This is the house where Robert spent his early years. His father, William, had an ambition to create a market garden business. He bought land here and he built the house whilst he took on work as a gardener in a local estate to make ends meet, leaving his wife, Agnes, to run the market garden. Now, I have to say, I hope that William was a better builder than he was a gardener, because he built his house for the family, and a week after Robert was born, there was a storm, part of the house collapsed, and the family had to temporarily move out whilst it was rebuilt. Now, it was in this house that Robert slept in a box bed with 3 of his siblings. They would gather round a peat fire in the night, listening to the songs and music that his mother Agnes loved, whilst his mother's cousin Betty told stories of the supernatural. And it's from these evenings Robert would have acquired his love of nature and his love of supernatural things, which was to come into one of his most famous poems. Burns' father ensured that Burns was taught to read and write, that he had an education, and Burns spent his free time writing poetry. His first success came with the publication of his first volume of poetry, the Kilmarnock edition, which was an immediate and enormous success. It reflected many of the themes that were to go with Burns throughout his career. Many of his stories and many of his poems reflected the things that he saw on a day-to-day basis. In To a Mouse, for example, he wrote about turning over a mouse's nest whilst ploughing the fields, and he captures the fear of this little creature when he writes, "Wee sleekit, cowering, timorous beastie, oh what a panic's in thy breastie." The success of the Kilmarnock edition encouraged Burns to move to Edinburgh, where he became an immediate success. He moved to Edinburgh at the height of the Scottish Enlightenment. This was a period of unprecedented discovery, advances in education, in music, in science, in medicine. This was a city where the King's chemist famously said that he could stand at the marketplace in Edinburgh and within half an hour take 50 men of genius by the hand. Robert was right at the centre of this, socialising with some of the most famous people of the day. Now, Robert, after the Kilmarnock edition, went on to develop his skills. And one of the areas that he became really good at was the narrative poem, the long storytelling poem. One of his most best known, and one of my particular favourites, was Tam O'Shanter. Tam O'Shanter, a character who I always suspect was based partly on Burns himself. In the poem Tam O'Shanter, Burns writes about a man who ignores his wife's advice. He goes out drinking with his friends, probably stays later than he should have done, has a little bit of a dalliance with the barmaid before mounting his grey mare Meg to ride home in the midst of a terrible storm. As he's riding, he sees some unusual light coming from the old ruins of Alloway Kirk, and he hears the sound of music and merrymaking. Now, what a sensible man would have done on hearing music coming from an abandoned church at night would have been to turn and ride the other way. But Tam had a good drink in him, and as Burns wrote, with tippenny beer, you'll fear no evil. With whiskey, you'll face the devil. Tam wants to go and find out what's happening. His horse, Meg, not so keen, until by hand and heel admonished, she ventures onward in the light, and there Tam saw an uncawed sight. Warlocks and witches in a dance, nae cotillon brent you from France, but hornpipes, jigs, strathspeys and reels, put fire and metal in their heels. This was a party for witches. The devil is sitting in the corner in the shape of a big black dog playing the bagpipes. Now Tam, he looks through a window, and there he sees the dance in all its splendour. Now, whilst most of the witches are rigwoody old hags, there is one rather shapely lass that catches Tam's eye. Now Tam, like Burns, has an eye for the lasses, and he watches this attractive young witch dancing in her short-cut night dress, her cutty sark. And as the dancing gets more and more energetic, more and more exciting, the piper loud and louder blew, the dancers quick and quicker flew. Tam just loses his mind temporarily and roars out, "Well done, cutty sark!" Obviously, this alerts the witches to his presence. Tam has to get onto his horse Meg and ride for safety, whilst the hellish legion of witches fly out after him, hoping to catch him before he can cross the river, because witches, a running stream, they daren't cross. So a frantic chase then ensues as Tam tries to reach this brig, the Brig of Doon, crossing the River Doon. In the meantime, the witches are getting closer and closer, with the young witch Maggie far before the rest. Well, as they get to the bridge, the witch leaps at Tam, but Maggie, his grey horse, springs onto the bridge, carries Tam to safety, but the witch catches the tail of poor Meg. The poem finishes just with a little warning to any man who might be thinking about having a good drink and eyeing up the lassies, just to remember the story of Tam O'Shanter's mare. Burns, of course, has a real reputation as a ladies' man. He had 12 children, 9 of whom were with the love of his life, Jeannie Armour. Only 3 of those children actually survived adulthood. Burns had a hard life. His work was very physical, and it gradually took a toll on his health, and he turned more and more to his passions of women, drinking and poetry. However, Burns died at the relatively young age of 37, possibly from rheumatic fever, and was buried in Dumfries. only 5 years after his death, the first Burns Supper was held. And Burns Suppers have continued throughout the world to this day. Burns Suppers are a wonderful event where somebody will toast the immortal memory of Robert Burns, tell some stories of his life. There might be one of his poems recited, perhaps Tam O'Shanter, or another epic narrative poem, Holy Willie's Prayer. There will always be an address to the haggis, at which our Scottish national dish is served to the assembled guests. Ayrshire, where Burns is from, has a wealth of places to explore, and if you've not been here and you have any interest in Burns, I strongly recommend that you get yourself a blue badge guide and come to visit Burnsland. Thank you.